Hello, my name is Anne Deschamps, and I am the director of Transcend's Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. I am a white woman with long brown hair, a lavender shirt with a white, lavender, and blue cardigan. I am sitting in my office here at Transcend in Rockville, Maryland. Last October, the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center partnered with the Great Plains ADA Center to put on a one-day event called Find Your Fun. This was a pre-conference for our ADA conference and was all about adaptive sports for children and adults with disabilities and the importance it can play in their lives, as well as inclusion of people with disabilities in parks and recreation. We had 150 people from all over the country participate. We were fortunate to have Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt as our keynote speaker that day. Well, Dr. Forber-Pratt's keynote was so compelling that Region 3 and Region 7 ADA centers wanted to bring that message to everyone. So, without further ado, I present Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt.
Thank you so much, Anne. My name is Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt, and I am a two-time Paralympian and medalist in the sport of wheelchair racing, a disability activist, and the director of the National Institute of Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, more commonly known as NIDILRR, within the Administration for Community Living as part of the Department of Health and Human Services within the federal government. Today, I'm wearing a red shirt and a black suit jacket, and I have long brown hair and a ponytail and brown skin, and not seen on camera, I am sitting in a manual wheelchair. And behind me is a blue virtual background showing ACL's logo. First of all, just a huge thank you again to Anne and her entire team from the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, the Great Plains ADA Center, the U.S. Access Board, the National ADA Symposium, and to all attendees and presenters who are here for the Find Your Fun ADA pre-conference. Nothing about us without us, a famed mantra within the disability community, also means in sport and in research and in disability sport research. For far too long, disability has been an afterthought, meaning it's not thought about up front in an integrated way. It's thought about after the fact, and then we go back and try to make it work. We see this in terms of disability services and accessibility and within the world of disability sport. An important piece of framing before I continue is a little bit more about who I am and what my perspective is on disability sport and the Paralympics and the connection to the world of disability. All Olympians and Paralympians have their own story about representing their country. For me, it was absolutely a tremendous honor, and as cliche as I know it sounds, it has been a dream come true. I'm working hard to push and to transform the research enterprise to be more inclusive of people with disabilities throughout all of its processes. This is no easy task, but for far too long, the world of research has been dominated by predominantly white, cisgender, and non-disabled male voices and researchers. And that is certainly not me. The identities, as you heard a little bit about, that I wear proudly include Paralympic medalist, an Indian adoptee, a disabled woman of color, researcher, and an activist. Prior to this role, I was on faculty at Vanderbilt University, where I primarily studied disability identity development. From my experience, representation matters. I also want to note that I have a very visible disability. I can't hide it, except a bit on a Zoom screen where I've learned that I have to actually disclose it. But there are many individuals who have less apparent or hidden disabilities who grapple with that layer of disclosure every single day. I also recall going through graduate school and fiercely trying to separate research from my lived experience of disability. I thought they had to be separate because that was what was taught and reinforced. But I was so fortunate to eventually find mentors who challenged me to bring those two together. And I found myself being able to thrive in that gap because my own lived experience and the lived experiences of others made my work better and stronger. And it was every researcher's dream to be able to directly engage with the community and share findings and what it really meant for the community. It was also really fun as I was traveling the world helping to spread information about disability sport and how to create disability sport programs to be able to interview some of these individuals. I'm here to say it's a beautiful place to be between and among both worlds, and I personally welcome you all into this space too. For far too long, we've just been taught and reinforced to separate those two. But even if you are not a qualitative researcher, you bring your whole self and your identities and your lenses to the work that you do. So I think it's important to be brave enough to claim those identities about who you are, what your background is, what brought you to this work in recreation and sport, and sharing, if you're willing, about your own disability status or that of your teams. It helps to make the less apparent more apparent, and to give confidence to individuals who may not realize that this could be a pathway for them professionally. This wheelchair is all that I've ever known. I was born in Calcutta, India, and adopted. And 2 months after arriving in the United States, I got sick and diagnosed with transverse myelitis, which is just focal inflammation of the spinal cord, which led to my paralysis. But being so young when I acquired my disability, I honestly thought that everyone in the whole world had a disability and that I was just one day going to outgrow it. I thought it was just a phase. But going deeper than that, I really thought that in order to become an adult, I first had to get rid of my disability, meaning in order to go to college, in order to get a job, in order to have a family, to do those things, I thought I had to be able to walk. And boy, was I wrong. But, you know, something that was really powerful to me was being a young 5-year-old and watching the Boston Marathon. For the very first time, I saw people in racing wheelchairs who had disabilities and were wearing their proud country name or university name across their chest. And it was so pivotal for me as a young 5-year-old to see these incredible individuals that were living their life, disability and all. This was so monumental and so powerful to learn about these racers and their accomplishments. And it taught me to dream, and boy, to dream big. You know, it was so monumental to me that I started dressing up on Halloween every single year as the winner of the Boston Marathon. And it was just such a powerful experience. And these individuals, such as Jean Driscoll, who went on to win the Boston Marathon 8 times, she ended up on the front page of the newspaper, being interviewed on television. And as that young girl, it was just so powerful to me to see myself represented on the television and in the newspapers. And you better believe that it led me on this path to want to get involved in disability sport. So I started begging and pleading, asking my parents if I could pretty please get one of those really shiny racing wheelchairs. I wanted to be involved in sport. Well, you know, what the experience was, which thankfully has changed from the time that I was a young kid, the closest opportunity for me to participate in adapted sport was 45 minutes away from my parents' house. And it was just to be able to go to a couple hours on a Saturday morning. It was a Saturday sports clinic. And it was really a fantastic experience to get to try every sport under the sun, whether that was wheelchair basketball, downhill skiing, tennis, well, of course, wheelchair racing, archery, horseback riding, kayaking, you name it, we tried it, which was so incredible. But it was a huge commitment on my parents' part in order for me to get exposed to sport in that way. And, you know, in addition to, you know, the ability to dream and to dream big and to set my sights on the Paralympic Games, there were also hardships such as sports related injuries, such as the naysayers and the encounters of ableism and discrimination on the basis of disability. As a young 14-year-old, I ended up hiring my own lawyer in order to advocate for myself to be able to get a high school education, having to stand up to injustices and discrimination. But these experiences have shaped me into who I am today. My disability has, in many ways, provided me with a lot of these opportunities. And when I look back on these old school projects where I drew myself on the top of the medal stand at the Paralympic Games, or a video that I made when I was just 6 years old, where I flat out stated that I was going to go to the Paralympic Games, my dream became a reality, having the opportunity to compete on the world stage in front of 91,000 fans who were there supporting my dream. Not all kids were fortunate to know that the Paralympics exist. Again, this is something that has gotten better in more recent years. But I also want to give credit to my grandmother, my Canadian grandmother, who would mail VHS videos recorded on tape to me from Canada, just so that I could be able to see some coverage of the Paralympic Games. I was very fortunate that because of the Boston Marathon experience and the videos that my grandmother would mail, that I knew that the Paralympics existed. But so many in the Paralympic movement discover adapted sport and discover Paralympic sport much later in life, not as a young child. But as I said, I do think that this is improving. I've come to realize throughout my journey that representing the nation on Team USA, it's another way to serve our country, to give back, and to motivate others to live up to their fullest potential. High atop the podium at World Championships, listening to the surreal sound of the national anthem, watching the American flag wave in the wind. Oftentimes people will ask me, well, what was going through your mind in that moment? I took a moment to really reflect and to think about how I got there and created that moment. Certainly being high atop that podium in many ways was transformed into a role model by many outsiders looking in. And with that, I believe comes a responsibility to pay it forward. And this includes being able to contribute to the research about the Paralympic movement, the benefits of disability sport, and the sharing of my experiences. The term Paralympics means alongside, which means alongside the Olympic Games. The Paralympic movement has its own history, its own entities, its own mottos and values. However, we rely on each other for our successes. And I'm not here to talk about the inclusion of the Paralympics into the Olympic Games, or even athletes who have and do cross over and compete as athletes with disabilities who have met Olympic standards. But what is really fundamentally important is the inclusion of two movements in spaces like this, the inclusion of Paralympics in conversations about the Olympics, inclusions of adapted sport in all conversations about sport and recreation that includes athletes and coaches with disabilities themselves, not as an afterthought, but in intentional and in purposeful ways. And, when I think about what this can do to open up the conversation, this is one of the ways that we can really push for inclusion. The other piece, too, that I think is important to note is that the Paralympic movement is still in its infancy in comparison to the Olympic Games. Just for context, the International Paralympic Committee was formed almost 100 years after the International Olympic Committee. But we unfortunately know that many individuals with disabilities face enormous barriers and concerns that prevent them or even stop them from engaging or accessing adapted sport. But there's so many benefits to adapted sport and recreation, and the places where adapted sport and recreation takes place can be community-based and through nonprofit organizations, through state parks and recreation associations, in public schools, in colleges and universities. There's so many different places where we are now seeing the availability of adapted sport. Common concerns, though, that do come up for disabled individuals include transportation, costs, access to specialized and oftentimes very costly equipment, and individual disability concerns. So needing personal care attendants in order to, for example, travel with the hockey team, or needing guides if you're blind or low vision. We have to address those needs the same that we address the equipment needs, so that we're not privileging certain disabled people and allowing them to participate in sport more than others. But before I talk a little bit more about the impacts of adapted sport, I do think that it is really it ties back to my story about the value that sport has to improve, yes, physical health and well-being, but also identity. I became the strong and confident individual that I am, and it gave me a sense of community and individuals to connect to because of disability sport. We also have been able to see that there are benefits of participating in disability sport as it leads to employment opportunities. So there is a recent study that actually showed that education and duration of disability that by playing an additional year of adapted sport it was associated with a 4% increase in likelihood of employment. And so education and duration of disability were found to be positive predictors of employment. And it was so cool to see that the role that that participation in adapted sport really led to that. We also have seen that in a different study, that having confidence was something that many individuals with disabilities pointed to as being successful in their ability to succeed in their jobs. And it was because of participation in adapted sport that they attributed to the reason that they had this confidence and so forth. So, when I look at some of this research and some of this work, I also see the extremely beneficial elements to a healthy disability identity, to self-care, to functional independence, to, of course, the physical strengths and health and benefits, but also the psychological well-being and self-efficacy. But we also are seeing that more and more that the community level and the community benefits of having that community from the disability sport world helps with combating stigma, helps with combating the stereotypes that are found just living life with a disability. We also need much more greater collaboration and coordination among disability services to make sure that opportunities are most readily available and that we are thinking about disability sport and adapted sport when we are thinking wholeheartedly across disability services. We also know that we still have work to do for our youth with disabilities. So youth with disabilities are twice as likely to be physically inactive, resulting in obesity rates that's almost 40% higher than youth without disabilities. And I believe this knowledge is just fundamental to consider when we're talking about the Paralympic movement and when we're talking about the adapted sport movement. We have to think about both developing athletes and talent pools for elite level competition. We don't yet have the pipeline and the support within the adapted and disability sport world. So we have to be able to think about this from both sides. I've also seen how sport can be a catalyst for social change and can expand access to other aspects of society for people with disabilities. Some of my own research, as I alluded to, on the ground in countries, helping them to develop sport programs for people with disabilities, the benefits are there, not just for the individual, but for the community and for the broader society. In each country that I've gone to visit and led sports clinics and conducted interviews with athletes, coaches, and program coordinators, this work highlighted not only the internalized benefits of enhancing your own perception of self, but also that of others. It changed people's perceptions in general about people with disabilities. Sport led to a stronger sense of identity and changed people's perceptions about individuals with disabilities and fostered citizens as leaders. And so when I think about what this means, what can we leverage? How can we think critically about what sports and what policies exist where we can push even greater inclusion? Well, when I think about what this has the potential to do, the sky's the limit. I think that there are a lot of places that things are that we're really chipping away, and we're really being able to help to put inclusion of individuals with disabilities on the map in the sport and recreation process. Notably, we only recently gained access to support for inclusion of students with disabilities in school-based sport as of 2013. Policies are important. Policies can be written to promote inclusion and opportunity. They also provide us with the justification as to the why. It's helpful when we move into uncharted territory. But having policies is only part of the puzzle. We have to enforce these policies and do this at all levels, within all levels of sport, within the recreation level, as well as the competitive level. And again, going back to what I was describing, we have to be making sure that disability is central in the conversation about sport and recreation. The ultimate goal is true inclusion, where individuals with disabilities are included in all aspects of their community, including sport and recreation. And then we can really be able to really have this be the norm, and that can be a catalyst then for growth. Adapted sport should not be an afterthought or an add-on. This is what nothing about us without us means for the sport world. Adapted sport must be fully integrated into all governance structures, programmatic activities, long-term visions and goals. And this is why I'm so excited that this conversation is happening here today. We are so glad that NIDILRR is a part of this solution, helping to support ADA centers like you all to do things like this, to have conversations like this, to be able to highlight the impacts, the benefits, centering the lived experiences, and being able to push us into this uncharted territory. In closing, the Paralympic movement and adapted sport world has many great challenges and opportunities ahead. And with your help, we will continue to improve and enforce policy to seek greater inclusion of these two movements and to encourage participation to build the pipeline. We need your allyship to grow the Paralympic movement and adapted sport world into the best that it can be. A huge thank you again to Anne and her entire team from the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, the Great Plains ADA Center, the U.S. Access Board, and the National ADA Symposium, and to all attendees and presenters who are here for the Find Your Fun ADA pre-conference. I hope you have a fantastic conference today and find your fun. Thank you.
I'm Ray Petty with the Great Plains ADA Center, and we're here at the Mid-Atlantic Conference doing a pre-day, one day before their two-day conference of adaptive and inclusive sports. And behind me you're seeing guys demonstrating wheelchair football. We have the Kansas City Chiefs wheelchair football team. We have the Kansas City Royals wheelchair softball team that I've played on. And we also have the Kansas City Kings wheelchair basketball teams, and we'll be doing some basketball also today. Really the idea here is fun. We've been trying to push and help adapt more inclusion along the lines of fun and recreation and fitness, in addition to just being able to get access to other city, university, school programs. But it's important for people with disabilities to be involved in sports because it keeps you fit, it keeps you sharp, it teaches you teamwork, and it's really good. It's a really good advantage in terms of just socialization and being prepared, for example, to go to work. Because you learn how to get along with people, you learn how to both lead and to follow and stay fit. That's what it's all about. We're really glad to be able to do this today here in Alexandria, Virginia, and we're going to be doing more of this when we do the National ADA Symposium, when we bring them back to Kansas City next May 21st through 24th.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Bill Botten. I work for the U.S. Access Board. I'm the training coordinator and technical assistant specialist. We're here today at the St. James Recreation Center, and we're participating in the Sports and Recreation, Adaptive Sports and Recreation Conference being held by the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center along with the Great Plains ADA Center. And it's my privilege to be here and representing the Access Board and providing input on the requirements for making sports facilities more accessible and usable to people with disabilities. This conference today is a real start in trying to promote the opportunities for people with disabilities in all forms of recreation and sport, and hopefully encouraging professionals in a lot of different industries, including local municipalities and parks and recreation departments and engineering firms and design firms, on making sure that everyone can come and play and participate and find their fun in adaptive sports and recreation. Because as I learned after my disability, that there's only one way to keep going, and that is to stay fit and to make sure that to live independently, you have the opportunity to be able to recreate and participate with your family and friends in all the environments that go on after work, on your evenings and weekends, the fun part of the day. So I'd just like to thank the conference organizers and hope that we made a small part in making sure that more facilities are accessible to and usable by people with of all abilities, whether you can see or you can hear or you can walk, that everyone's got a place in sport. You can find out about the Access Board at our website at www.access-board.gov. And please use this as a resource for providing the minimum requirements in building new and altering existing recreation facilities.
So adaptive sports has been life-changing for me since the very beginning. I got hurt when I was 20. I really didn't know anything about adaptive sports, and I feel like that's also the general public too. There's not very many people out there presenting adaptive sports, pushing it per se. We've had a lot with the Paralympic movement lately, catching up to the Olympic movement, but it's very infant right now. We don't have very many teams throughout the nation to equal the amount of people that would want to play. So it's been very, very important to me for the last 5 years to start adaptive programs in Kansas City, whether it's basketball, rugby, tennis, softball. We've been doing that because there's a need, and not only in Kansas City, but there's a need in every city. And having people, having the initiative, finding a local organization to help is key to starting that. But even just if you have one camp, like what we did, we had an Athletes on Wheels camp where we brought in 10 athletes and we let them bring siblings, friends, cousins, whatever it may be, to make them feel more comfortable. Because it's so new that a lot of families aren't ready for that, or in tune with what adaptive sports or sports can do for a family member of theirs or themselves if it's them. So being involved with the community, setting that stuff up is, I think, going to be the groundbreaking step, getting everybody involved. We started, I guess, like I said, with the camp, but I've heard other cities start with buying it through the community, whether it's the city of Kansas City, Kansas, and they buy 5 chairs, but that's a start. And then, if it ever came where somebody was looking to get into adaptive sports, they have it there ready to go. But that's where it's going to need to start is with the communities and small organizations. And there's plenty of governing bodies out there, but they're not in certain locations throughout the United States. So starting that small, even just a small group can magnify into being part of a national organization, whether it's the NWBA, National Wheelchair Basketball Association, USQRA, US Quad Rugby Association. There's all kinds out there. USTA is a great one. They've done a really, really good job of incorporating not only their adaptive athletes into their own events, but they joined those with able-bodied events to make it one holistic event. And if we can get there in every sport, I think that's when we're winning.